Hey everyone, thanks for joining me on this next episode. Today we're going to assemble and paint a resin dinosaur model, the 1/20th scale Utahceratops by Candid Sculpts. Michael Whitworth from Vancouver Island, British Columbia is the sole owner and operator of Candid Sculpts. In just 3 short years, Mike has completed various dinosaur kits in which he's sculpted, molded, and casted himself. Mike began his journey with no prior experience. Inspired by various paleo artists and a desire to save money on expensive model kits, he decided to create his own. Basing his work off scientific papers, Michael meticulously sculpts beautiful and lifelike dinosaurs in 1/20th scale. Thus far, he's completed almost 10 kits, and in my opinion, he gets better with each one. When Mike revealed his Utahceratops kit, I was immediately drawn to this unique ceratopsian that I've never heard of before. I knew next to nothing about this dinosaur. I couldn't even guess where the fossil was found, but I knew I had to grab this model. This stunning 10-piece resin kit is covered in beautifully sculpted scales, with plenty of large osteoderms along the upper back and sides of the model. This dino is also quite thick and detailed from top to bottom. With one of the best ceratopsian head sculpts I've ever seen, with a beautiful frill, I'm excited to piece this guy together. This kit is easily glued together. As I do this, I get a real appreciation for the incredible detail Mike puts into hand sculpting each and every scale. Next, I mix a 2-part epoxy called green stuff to fill in any gaps. I roll thin pieces and coax them into the cracks. After, I use rubber tools to smooth out the putty before I begin sculpting. I try my best to recreate the scale patterns by drawing short lines along the putty. We begin by priming the model in a Tamiya light gray. We then coat the entire model in a light beige. Next, we pour a few drops of brown wash, a few drops of water, mix it up, and apply to the lower half of the model. This step is quite satisfying as the brown wash seeps in between the scales. Just look how nicely this wash flows between the scales and crevices. Honestly, this might be the best part of my day. I then create a palette of skin tones to dry brush onto the scales we just washed. This creates a variety of colors that, in my opinion, make the animal look more realistic. This step helps to make the scales pop a bit more. To be honest, if you don't want to buy all these colors, a simple beige will do just fine. It's time to apply some blue. I airbrush Vallejo's pale blue, mixed in with just a touch of Vallejo's blue-gray, and apply it to the top half of the model, creating a counter-shaded look with a darker top half and a lighter underbelly. Next, I dry brush a darker blue onto the scales. For this, I'm using a Vallejo Field Blue. If you'd like the scales to be a bit darker, you can try using a Tamiya Field Blue, which has a slightly darker pigment. Here's a look at our dry brushed Utahceratops so far. The next step is to design a pattern that connects the darker upper half and the lighter underbelly. I use a slightly watered down paint by Vallejo called Buff, a nice strong color, and begin mapping out a design from the bottom up. I envisioned a stripe-like pattern that carries through on the neck area, the back legs, and the tail. After this pattern has been set, I start to add little splotches and dots. I feel this makes the pattern look a bit more interesting and realistic. I don't want to go too nuts with the pattern. When painting dinos, sometimes you just gotta know when to stop and not overdo it. I've made this mistake a few times, and a small part of me dies every time I look at those models. It's time to design the frill. I start by outlining a pattern along the raised edges and outer edge of the frill. From there, I work inward, creating some line patterns. To be honest, I was a bit lazy and didn't have a solid plan for the frill design and ended up freestyling the design as I went along. Lucky for me, this pattern turned out fairly well. However, I'd recommend you have a design pattern planned out when tackling something as intricate as a frill. I've freestyled frill patterns in the past, and let me tell you, if those models were real dinosaurs, they wouldn't be attracting a mate anytime soon. I then add some field blue to the area of the face where the blue meets the lighter beige. I'm trying to create an uneven checkered-like pattern. As I do this, I'd like to take a moment to thank all of you who have subscribed to this channel. This is my 4th video thus far, and it's been a great learning experience for me. I hope to continue to bring you new dino content very soon. Using the Vallejo buff again, I paint some random scales to emphasize the speckled-like pattern. Now that our pattern has been set, I go over all the beige colored areas I just painted with a watered down brown wash to darken all the cracks and crevices around these scales. After the wash is dried, I go over the scales again with the Vallejo buff. This makes the scales and the patterns pop a lot more. If you like to vary up the tones a bit, feel free to mix in some lighter and darker tones in with the beige and apply to random scales. It's very subtle, but I feel this makes the scales look a bit more realistic and not so uniform. One of the final steps is to paint a light gray on all the facial horns, beak, toes, and epoccipitals. The epoccipitals, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, are the bony horn structures that decorate the frill. Once the light gray dries, we apply a burnt umber ink to the same areas. Along the way, I clean up some of the excess ink with a clean brush. The inking works very well on the horn areas, seeping into the little cracks that Mike has sculpted in. Once the ink has dried, I dry brush a neutral gray mixed in with a hint of light gray onto the same area. Make sure to brush these areas lightly. We're coming down the home stretch. I apply some flesh wash to the region around the eyes and the mouth. As these areas dry, I spray paint sepia to the tip of the beak. This makes it look a bit dirty or worn out. Finally, the eyes. I paint the whole eye in a brown mixed with a touch of red. Next, I go over it with a flat yellow, leaving some of the brownish red on the outer edges. And I finish this off with a black pupil. Here's our finished Utahceratops. I had a great time painting this one up, and I hope you like how he turned out. I'd like to thank Mike of Candid Sculpt for this stunning kit. It's definitely my new favorite from your line of dinosaur models. If you'd like to grab one for yourself, please reach out to Mike at Candid Sculpts on Facebook. I'd also like to thank Kayakasaurus for sharing my last video. That kind gesture has really helped me in getting my content out to dino fans around the world. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a like and subscribe for more future dino content. Thank you again for your support.